Soy Rubén Vigil, jefe del área de comunicación y prensa de la Fundación Princesa de Asturias. Bienvenidos a la rueda de prensa que va a ofrecer a continuación el doctor Derrick Rossi, Premio Princesa de Asturias de Investigación Científica y Técnica. Recuerden que estamos en una rueda de prensa telemática, con lo cual para formular sus preguntas tendrán que levantar la mano físicamente o utilizar la aplicación que ofrece la plataforma Zoom. También pueden utilizar el chat de la propia plataforma. Vamos a comenzar directamente con las preguntas. Bueno, tenemos una primera pregunta un tanto simpática. Dice, ¿se vacunó con Pfizer? ¿Le hubiera gustado vacunarse con Moderna?
Thank you for the question. So I've been asked this before, which vaccine I got, and it's people find it very funny that I got the Pfizer vaccine, even though I founded Moderna. But actually, I'm pleased to say that I got the Pfizer vaccine because I'm Canadian, but I live in America, where there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy and a lot of misinformation. And I work for Boston Children's Hospital, and they were offering vaccines, and I received an email one day telling me to come in for my vaccine, which I was happy to do. And the vaccine that they happened to be offering that day was the Pfizer vaccine. They had offered Moderna the week before. But I did not hesitate to take the vaccine because it was an FDA-approved vaccine. And also, it allowed me to publicly encourage the rest of America and the rest of the world not to vaccine shop, but rather, if it's an approved vaccine, to receive the vaccine that's offered to you when you go to your doctor or go to the pharmacy or wherever you happen to be getting your vaccine. So in the end, I'm actually more pleased that I got the Pfizer vaccine, although I have to admit it might have been nice to get the Moderna vaccine just because I founded the company, but I think there'll be more occasions in the future, so I'm not too worried.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos una pregunta de Jaime Martín, de la agencia EFE. Dice, las vacunas están generando beneficios multimillonarios a los laboratorios que las desarrollan, mientras cientos de millones de personas no tienen posibilidad de acceder a ellas. ¿Cómo se podría corregir esta situación? ¿Son justos los precios de las vacunas?
Well, so it's a great question. And it's really not an issue of vaccine pricing that is leading to some people on planet Earth being vaccinated before other people on planet Earth. What's really driving that is the rollout of the vaccines and the manufacturing of billions of vaccines, which is what you need to inoculate the planet. So actually, vaccines are a very, very inexpensive medical product. It's one of the most inexpensive products that there is. You know, a typical genetic medicine could be anywhere of $50,000 to $100,000 per year. A vaccine is $20 to $30, just talking about US dollars now. So they can't get much cheaper than that. They're very inexpensive medicine. But still, some nations don't even have the resource to purchase, let's say, 20 or 30 million vaccines for their people. And there you need more wealthy countries participating in purchasing vaccines and donating them to these less wealthy countries. And that's actually happening. It's happening around the planet. That the wealthy nations are purchasing excess numbers of vaccines and distributing them around the planet. But I really do want to point out, if we had, let's say, 10 billion vaccine doses, I think there's a population of about 8 billion people on Earth. Had we been able to produce 8 billion vaccines in the first week of manufacturing, we would have been able to get them out to everybody on planet Earth in a equitable and as quick manner as possible. So really the issue is the manufacturing bottleneck. And of course, and I don't find this terribly surprising, that the nations that for example, where the biotech companies are based and these wealthy nations that do advanced purchases of the vaccines, it's not surprising that their populations would get vaccinated first. I don't think anybody would find that terribly surprising. But there is a clear recognition that the whole world needs to be vaccinated, because if we don't vaccinate the whole world, this virus is going to continue to mutate and continue to propagate and continue to be with us for years and decades and maybe centuries to come. So there's no question that there is a global awareness that as quickly as we can possibly do it, everybody needs to be vaccinated, and I don't think the dollars are standing in the way of that. I think it's more the production.
Tenemos una pregunta de Jorge, por favor.
Sí, buenas. Vamos a ver, al hilo de esto que acaba de decir, todo el mundo tiene que vacunarse. ¿Tiene alguna opinión respecto a la intención de algunos gobiernos y empresas de obligar a la población a vacunarse? Gracias.
Well, that's a really good question. So basically, you're talking vaccine mandates. Do we need to force people to get a vaccine? I have a mixed opinion on that. I think it's in everybody's best interest to get vaccinated. I think as a community, as a population, you are not just thinking about your own health when you get vaccinated, but those of your loved ones and those of your communities. So I would encourage everybody, and I would hope that the messaging and the science messaging that science is real and vaccine hesitancy and vaccine misinformation is not real would be drowned out, so that 95, 100% of the people on the planet would wish to be vaccinated. But I have a hard time mandating vaccination for people if they truly, for whatever reason, don't wish to be vaccinated. I think they have a right not to be. But unfortunately, what's propelling that attitude is misinformation. So I think really the problem is misinformation. And if we could, for example, it's interesting, this foundation and this award in Europe, in Spain, is really something remarkable. I was talking to some of the other laureates today that this would be something that wouldn't happen in America, where science is celebrated and scientists can, be presented to the general public and to speak about their work, to make the public comfortable that, hey, those are real people that have real jobs and they're passionate about what they do and science is real. This is something you wouldn't see I'm Canadian, but I live in America. So really I think the need for mandates is because of misinformation, quite frankly. If everybody had the correct information that hundreds of millions of people have been vaccinated, it's entirely safe, and it protects you from getting ill, getting on a ventilator, and ending up dead. If that message were clearly made to everybody, I don't think you'd have to mandate people to get vaccinated. They would get vaccinated.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos otra pregunta de Jaime de la agencia EFE. Dice, ¿se puede acabar con la pandemia o habrá que convivir con ella y por lo tanto con las vacunas, como pasa con la gripe? ¿Durante cuánto tiempo protege actualmente Moderna, la vacuna de Moderna, una vez recibidas 2 dosis? Un estudio publicado estos días refleja que la caída de anticuerpos cae bruscamente al 6º mes con las vacunas de Moderna y Pfizer.
Yes, so there was 2 questions there. The first question was, is the virus going to become endemic? Are we going to live with this virus or some variants of the virus for the foreseeable future, like influenza? Influenza comes every year. It's slightly different flavor every year. But we cannot eradicate influenza from the planet, whereas other viral pathogens we've been successful at eradicating, smallpox, for example. But I think most epidemiologists would agree that it is likely that SARS-CoV-2 and its variants, this is the virus that causes COVID-19, it is likely that this virus will become endemic. And the reason for that is because it is a respiratory virus, so it's easily transmitted, as we have seen, respiratory disease breaks out in Wuhan, China in late 2019, and by March 2020, the WHO declares a global pandemic. It's spread around the planet. So when you have a pathogen that is that effective at moving around, and of course with each new infection gives the opportunity for a new variant to emerge, because viruses replicate by the millions of copies in us, and all you need is a small mutation that provides a selective advantage for a new variant to emerge. And we've seen this with alpha, beta, delta, epsilon, and that list is going to go on and on and on, I'm afraid. So I think it's pretty safe to say that this virus will become endemic. The second question was vaccination by, let's call it Gen 1 Moderna or Pfizer vaccines with time show diminishing immunoreactivity, although I would argue, and studies have shown that they're still highly, highly protective, even after 6 months from getting severe disease, getting hospitalized and dying. So there's still protection. But it is normal and natural that our immune systems, when they're exposed to a pathogen, if you happen to be infected prior to vaccination, or if you get the vaccination to alert your immune system and activate your immune system, that immunity, this is just a normal course of our immune systems, wanes with time. It diminishes with time. This is known, this was predictable, so of course this is probably nobody's seeing this. I'm making a shape with my arm here showing that, we expect that as time moves on, the protective power of being vaccinated will wane. That's normal, that's expected. At some point, though, it dips below a point that you're no longer protected from infection. And already we've seen that for some of the vaccines out there, they've a lot of breakthrough infections, people that are vaccinated getting infected. It's called a breakthrough infection. And these numbers are increasing, and they're increasing with the amount of time between your last vaccination. That's not surprising. Again, and it of course depends on your age too and your own personal immune system. So it's expected that the protective power of the vaccine would diminish with time. And of course, the question is, when do we need a booster? Because that's ultimately where this question is getting to. And there's, I would say, not definitive scientific evidence or clear-cut evidence that says, okay, everybody that was vaccinated 8 months ago, now if they see SARS-CoV-2 Delta, everybody gets infected and they get into the hospital. That would be a clear time to have a booster. So that type of, clear-cut, okay, we now need to give a booster, that data's not in. And it's confounded by the fact that people are different ages, they are, have different immune capacities themselves. So it really becomes on a per person basis, quite frankly. So the recommendations now, and again, I don't find this surprising, is that those that are the most vulnerable, the elderly, by the way, who were in most countries vaccinated first. So we vaccinated the elderly first, so it's been the most amount of time since they saw their second shot or their first shot, if it was Johnson & Johnson, whichever it happened to be. So therefore, their immune systems, which are not robust in the first place because they're old people, and we know that old people's immune system is not particularly robust as a young person's would be. So it doesn't surprise me that the recommendation would be, let's start to give boosters to the elderly population. Makes perfect sense based on their immune system and the amount of time since they were last vaccinated.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos una pregunta de Senha Bolelli, de Anadolu, la agencia turca de noticias. Dice, en la mayor parte del mundo los científicos tienen problemas para encontrar un trabajo. Todavía un jugador de fútbol o un piloto de Fórmula 1 gana mucho más que un científico. ¿Cree usted que después de lo que está pasando con la COVID-19, los científicos tendrán más posibilidades de encontrar un trabajo decente?
Well, it's a funny question. You could argue, I think that, and I totally agree with the premise of the question that, people earn a lot of money for jobs that by certain standards might not seem as important as, let's say, a frontline worker or a fireman or a teacher. These are really important jobs that don't get paid a lot of money. And scientists falls into that category as well. Whereas, movie stars and football players and race car drivers, well, they serve a function too. People like to be entertained, and there's obviously some sort of value in what they do, because otherwise they might not earn all that money. I'd like to see, teachers and frontline workers and fire people and police earning more money. These are really, really critical jobs. Scientists, we have the best job in the world, quite frankly. There isn't a better job. It's a really hard job, there's no question about it. But it's also not for everybody, because you have to take a lot of disappointment in science. When you do an experiment, most experiments that you do fail. Quite frankly, you're trying to ask a question and you set up an experiment and it fails. So you have to have a very thick skin to be a scientist. You have to be used to failure. And I actually think a pretty good scientist succeeds in their experiment about 10 or 20% of the time. If you succeed 10 or 20% of the time, you're doing quite well. And it's not because you're 80% poor at your job. It's just that the question that you're trying to address is a really challenging question to get an answer for. And so you have to chew at it for years and decades to get the answer that really is the bona fide scientific answer. So, for compensation for scientists, I would say that the compensation is having one of the greatest jobs that there is on the planet, which is the ability to pursue the unknown for the sake of answering the question of what is the answer to the unknown. That's a pretty human thing that all of us wish to do, or many of us wish to do, and scientists get to do it as a job, so that's pretty good compensation.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos otra pregunta de Jorge García de la agencia Europa Press.
Sí, hola otra vez. He leído unas declaraciones suyas hace unos meses en las que sostenía que creía que el virus salió por accidente del laboratorio de Wuhan. Me gustaría preguntarle si sigue pensando lo mismo, en qué se basa y si además piensa que el virus fue creado en esa instalación. Gracias.
Well, that was actually a misquote in the press, so thank you for raising that. So I said at the time in that interview that it was not yet known whether or not the virus had emerged by accident from the virology lab in Wuhan, or whether or not it had emerged through zoonosis, jumping directly from animals into humans. And by the way, it's still unknown scientifically. So that's actually the case, and we may never actually really find the answer to that, which is a little bit surprising, because usually you can find out the answer to things like this. But it's possible that we don't find out the answer to this. Do I have my own, every one of us in the room and every one of us listening has their own idea of whether they think, option 1 or option 2 is more likely. I'm going to keep my opinion to myself, but because this is not the forum to talk about it. But yeah, it's scientifically unknown, and I was misquoted a few months ago. So thank you for bringing that up, because I really want to clarify that.
Otra pregunta de Jaime Martín de la agencia EFE. ¿Cree que el futuro de las vacunas pasa por el ARN mensajero?
Yes, absolutely. So the question was, is mRNA vaccination going to be the therapeutic paradigm that we use for most, if not all, future vaccinations? And the answer that I would give to that is absolutely yes. Vaccines have a history of development since the 15th century China, actually, with smallpox. And then it really became an industry in the 1800s with smallpox. And the old methods for vaccinating were really primitive. So somebody would get smallpox, and they would have the pustules on the skin that would burst, and then the person would either die or survive, but they would scrape a little bit of the sort of the dust from the arm of the person that had smallpox, and they'd use that to scratch onto the skin of somebody who didn't have smallpox to try to protect them against smallpox. Well, that worked because there's dead viral particles on that, burst pustule, but sometimes there was live virus in that burst pustule. So sometimes when you were trying to inoculate the person, you'd give them live virus and you would give them smallpox. So that was the first version of a vaccine. Clearly not a very safe one. If we talk about the safety of the current vaccine, it's nothing like the safety of the original smallpox vaccine. Then the technologies evolved so that viruses would be grown up and then they'd be inactivated, try to make them totally incapable of replication, and then you'd inoculate somebody with that so that they wouldn't get infected, but they'd mount an immune response to that. And then, the technology developed farther that you didn't need the whole virus, you just needed, a key antigen, a key protein on the virus, and that was sufficient to induce a robust immune system in the person. Well, the new technology for doing that now is mRNA, and it's very, very elegant, and it's very, very versatile. And, as we have seen during this pandemic, it's lightning fast to deploy this technology. So from the SARS-CoV-2 virus being published online in January of 2020 till 42 days later, Moderna shipped a clinical grade vaccine to the National Institutes of Health in America to begin clinical trials. 42 days to develop a totally new vaccine. That's incredible. Unprecedented in all of human history to have a medicine made that fast. That's incredible. That, by the way, then went on to be incredibly efficacious and is now in hundreds of millions of people around the planet. So that technology can be used to express the antigen of most, if not all, other pathogens that we wish to vaccinate ourselves against, including some that we've had a hard time tackling with traditional technologies, such as, parasitic organisms like malaria and the like. So I think you're going to see the whole vaccine industry. In fact, it's happening. All of the major companies, all the pharma companies, they're all working on having mRNA technologies to tackle vaccine needs of the planet. But in addition to that, of course, is the potential for mRNA therapeutics, which is also enormous. We haven't yet had mRNA therapeutic come to regulatory approval yet, but multiple clinical trials are ongoing and they're showing promise. So we are going to see mRNA therapeutics come to people. So I've been saying this for years. I founded Moderna in 2010, and I made the bold prediction in 2010. I said, well, in 10 years, we're going to see 5 mRNA drugs. I can't remember the exact numbers. I said, in 15 years, there'll be 15. In 20 years, there'll be 40. And so we're at 10 years now, or 11 years, and we've got now 1 approved. Maybe that's what I said. I can't quite recall. I was probably more bold than that, maybe said 2 or 3 or 4. But I do believe that more mRNA therapeutics are coming, certainly more mRNA vaccines. And that is hopeful for combating human health in so many different areas for which there is not a good medicine that you can take that's going to help you or your loved one tackle their health challenge.
Gracias. Tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta que formula de nuevo la agencia turca de noticias. ¿Qué es lo que más le ha sorprendido durante esta pandemia, tanto científica como personalmente?
Well, the most striking thing I've seen, so I'm getting the translation now. Okay. So the most striking thing I've seen, well, the most impressive thing is the fact that humanity and the scientific community could sort of band together. And this is, there's a few laureates here that are being recognized for this development of this vaccine. There's hundreds, thousands of people that are involved. There's thousands of people that went before us through the decades before, whose science was important to get to this point. We were lucky that all the pieces were in place for us to be able to respond so rapidly and at such large scale for such an enormous health challenge. So there's no question that that's impressive. I think that should be impressive to everybody. The thing that I find most striking, though, is not that. The thing that I find most striking, as I said, I'm Canadian, but I live in America. The thing that I found the most striking is that somehow the political class, or some in the political class, have somehow managed to make science the enemy and target science and make, spread misinformation that science is somehow, we should be anti-science and anti-vaccination. And I mean, that boggles my mind. You want something truly extraordinary. It's that, people could spread this information to make people disbelieve science. I'm a scientist. I know what goes into science. Scientists are the most skeptical people on the planet. When we make a discovery in the lab, we spend the next 5 years trying to disprove our own results. That's the job of the scientist. You throw as many rocks as you can at your discovery to make you convinced that what you think is real is not real. This is what scientists do. We are very, very, very critical people. And by the way, then we publish our results, and other scientists who are really critical people examine that, and they go over it with a fine-tooth comb, and it only gets published after every stone has been lifted, and we can definitively say that this is a scientific fact based on all the evidence that we at least have right now. The internet is not the domain of science. And yet, a lot of people are getting their science information from the internet. I say that the internet is a liar. I say it all the time. There's a lot of wonderful things on the internet. There's a lot of things you can learn on the internet. There's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of really dangerous misinformation on the internet. So what I find most remarkable is that we as a species who are pretty smart, we're also pretty stupid in many regards, but that we couldn't recognize that this was a moment to move towards something that's real, something that has the potential to get us out of a global crisis, and in fact is proving that it can do just that, yet still people are being sort of, I would say, poisoned with misinformation. So quite frankly, it's a weird answer, but that's what I find the most remarkable about the past year and a half.